Well, it's that time of the program when we bring in our guest analysts and commentators to speak on some of the key things you've heard on the program. Tonight, Professor Adeniyi, who is the Deputy Dean of the Postgraduate School at Bayes University in Abuja, and journalist and Arise analyst Dr. Constance Ikokwu are my guests. Good to see you both, and thanks for your time. Let me start with Dr. Ikokwu. You had Anchor Briggs and some of the key things she raised. But first again, she was particular about the ministers, and she was wondering why some of them were not given something that tallies with their calling. Specifically, she mentioned that of aviation and a few others.
Well, the first thing to say is that the ministerial positions are very crucial for any government to function effectively and appropriately. They play a very critical role in terms of policy formulation, implementing the programs of the government. Sometimes they act as a bridge between the executive and legislative arm. They go out there and represent the government and sort of carry out all the programs. So they also have to provide leadership and expertise, which is where she comes in, what she was saying. Comes in. They have to provide expertise in the ministry where they are to ensure that programs run properly. Yes, they do not have to be, particularly, they don't have to have a particular degree for the ministry, but it helps. So, for instance, the Minister of Health is Ali Pate. That's a good one. Right fit for the right ministry. And then I hear that the guy at the digital economy is also good. I think Bosu Tijani, something like that, is also good. The guy at finance, Wale Edun, is also a good fit there. Some other places, not particularly so. And when you look at the list, you find out that it was driven more by political consideration rather than transformation and reform. I mean, why do you need 9 former governors? It's heavily political. 9 former governors there. You might have opened up the space to give room for new faces and reformists so that you can, sort of have a new shape for the government. But as it is, some have argued that give them some time and let's see what happens. I would say that the risk, or this government risks, not being being even worse than the last government if they're not careful, but let's say.
Well, again, as I bring in Professor Adeniyi, aren't there new faces? I see new faces.
First, Suleiman, I remember something that Aristotle said ages ago, in his theory of finality, that every individual material body, works in an intrinsic way towards the realization of an objective. Now we have a president that has constituted his cabinet. Let's assume that he drops all these 40-something people, and wants to retry again. By the time he retries, it is practically going to be impossible for us not to have reasons, to pick at them, Hardly would you be able to have a perfect fit in this kind of situation. And against that background, you also see that there's a confliction of elements, in the composition of the cabinet and, of course, in the allocation of portfolios to them. One is leadership. Leadership, first of all, like he alluded to, essentially the ministers are supposed to provide leadership. Sometimes expertise may not be necessary, even though it could help. And of course, in providing leadership, you are providing inspiration, motivation, designing and charting and supervising policy direction and ensuring the implementation. That's one. Then two, of course, we also know that there are some of them that need some level of professionalism. Technical expertise, maybe communication, health definitely, maybe law, and of course education. And in addition to the ones that she has mentioned, she mentioned party, I agree. Mentioned communication, I agree. She mentioned law, I agree. It's also education. Professor Tahir Maman comes with a lot of experience, a consummate lawyer, an astute academic, and of course, a versatile educational administrator, having been Director General of Nigerian Law School for 8 years, and of course, Vice Chancellor of Bayes University for 7.5 years. A learned senior advocate of Nigeria, very calm, easygoing person who can be very effective under pressure. Right fit for that job, no doubt, and of course, we just have to wait and see the many reforms that he will bring into that ministry, you know. And if you move away from him, of course, you also see political consideration. But in talking about political consideration, it's also the chances of productivity and efficiency. Overall, I didn't go to Rivers State all through, but the impression we came out with is that Governor Wike was excellent as governor of Rivers State. And of course, before you could preside over the affairs of Abuja, you know, the records from success, you need to be very forceful, you need to be determined. And if you're talking about a forceful leader, somebody who will be less emotional, less sentimental in dealing with, you know, the many things, many shenanigans going on in this Abuja, you need to be as forceful as a Governor Wike can possibly be, you know. So it's not a bad choice in that regard, irrespective of whether it was political consideration or not. And of course, Umahi, who is going to be in works, he's got that pedigree, an engineer. You know, so all these things are conflicting, and as they are conflicting, we should expect some level of result at the end of the day. Yes, there were surprises, no doubt. I've heard a lot of people mention it, and I agree with them. Like a Dele Ailake, for instance, going to Solid Minerals. This is a very excellent communicator, somebody whose background is richly in media and communication, but going to Solid Minerals. And of course, we can actually provide a justification for him to say that he's just simply going to provide leadership, leveraging on his managerial experience, you know. Again, reinforcing what we said earlier, that sometimes it's not about expertise, but about the provision of inspiration. But one would have expected that maybe somebody that has an expertise in that area should have been in charge. But it's practically impossible if you are considering the question of politics, the question of technical expertise, the question of professionalism, to assemble for the something number of people and get everybody fitting into all the portfolios that you have allocated. Maybe the other thing we should continue to worry about is the cost of taking care of the ministries and the ministers. Don't forget, this is the largest we're going to be having in this country. And what do we do where we're going to be having more ministers, more permanent secretaries, more directors, you know, okay. And adding up to that will be more pecs and perquisites of office. You know, the only hope is probably that they're going to come with some ingenuity, some creativity that will increase the income base of the country so that they can be probably taken care of, and of course, the citizen can also benefit at the end of the day.
Let me bring in Constance Ikokwu again. Dr. Ikokwu, one of the other observations she raised is the Ministry of Niger Delta. And it's over 24 hours since that list came out. Nothing explaining why the disappearance or omission of that ministry by the government.
As a Niger Deltan, she has every right to ask that question. Now it's out in the open. The president is there to answer. He has a media spokesman. You know, they should answer that question. Even the media spokesman, I think, is from the Niger Delta, is he? I think, I'm not sure. No, he's from Edo.
No, he's from Niger Delta.
Oh, okay, so yeah, so they have to answer that question because it's important. That's where all the money, or most of the money.
Ajuri Ngalale, where is your ministry?
Yes, exactly. That's where most of the money of Nigeria comes from. And I want to piggyback on what she was saying about environmental degradation. I went to the Niger Delta, I think last month. I flew into Uyo and then drove about, was it 2.5 hours to Rivers State, and then drove again the next day to Abonema. And when you're driving through Uyo, it looked very lush and green, you know, thick savanna forest. And then you drive towards Ogoni area, where you then begin to see every 200 or 300 meters, there's a security post. You have to stop, they have to ask you questions, and then you follow. It became very dry, and then you begin to see the pollution, you know, in the waters, and then you go to Abonema.
You saw all that?
Oh yeah, and then when I got to Abonema, you begin to see the rivers. Everywhere is so heavily polluted with oil, and it looks miserable. Really, it looks miserable. And I began to ask myself a question: why does this happen in a country like this? This is where the money comes from, and we cannot take care of these environments. I do not know where the problem lies, whether it's the state governors, whether it's the federal government, but someone has to take responsibility. So again, the question: why is the Ministry of Niger Delta? But all the while they had the NDDC and the Ministry of Niger Delta, did they make any impact on the people from that region? If they did not, then the people should definitely speak up. The governors, what are they doing? She talked about the study. In Port Harcourt, they were telling me about the impact of this oil pollution and gas flaring. You know, on the skin, on the wall, you see, you know, dust and some black stuff all over the place. And I'm sure it affects people health-wise as well. So yes, they should definitely go ahead and conduct these studies. You know, when you live in an environment where it's destroyed day in, day out, you cannot fish, you cannot farm, and yet you're very poor. It's depressing. You know, people should not live in this way. So again, where's the Ministry of Niger Delta? And I hope, and the NDDC, that they begin to turn around, you know, for that region.
Well, Professor Adeniyi, one part of Nigeria, once anything goes wrong, it affects the larger part of the country. So we come back to the ministry, degradation, pollution, and of course the absence of once upon a time Niger Delta ministry.
Yeah, but we've not had the final word from the government, so we shouldn't necessarily lose hope that has been maybe scrapped. You know, we want to believe, we want to hope that, you know, we still have about 3 ministers that have not been completely cleared, you know, and perhaps it's Niger Delta has been reserved for one of them that will eventually be cleared, or maybe a replacement will be found at the end of the day. Otherwise, the Niger Delta ministry is very, very critical. There were reasons that brought about its formation in the first instance. Yes, we've been having some kind of interventionist body to give extra effort towards resolving the crisis in our region, and considering the critical role they play in the economy of this country. Imagine, I remember we once had Ompadec, and of course, Empadec is the predecessor to NDDC, sort of. NDDC came in the wake of the democratic dispensation through the instrumentality of Olusegun Obasanjo, first president, and in the dispensation. I remember when the issues were being debated in the National Assembly. You know, and of course, we also had 13% derivation. And sometimes we even celebrate that the developments, the intervention agencies should probably be multiplied so that the problems, the mounting problems, can be resolved. Maybe that's why we also had the amnesty program. I don't see any reason why NDDC would not continue to do what they are doing. But again, do not forget the very valid question that Chief Ikokwu raised, you know, that yes, sometimes resources are being allocated, but again, some citizens of that region, coming as leaders, also mismanage those resources, and they mention some very important names, you know. So while we are concerned, while we continually agitate, you know, for good attention to be given to that region, considering the role they are playing, we should also not forget the question of accountability and transparency on the part of the administrators of those funds. You know, just like the revered Chief Ikokwu mentioned the other day.
Let's see if we can close on this, Dr. Ikokwu, and it has to do with expectations of the distinguished gentlemen and ladies that will be sworn in next week.
There are high expectations given the conditions of the country, especially the economic conditions. However, I want to throw in something quickly, cost of governance. Cost of governance. We're going to have eventually 48 ministers. That's the biggest we've had in this democratic dispensation, and even in the history of the country. That's a lot. We hope that they will work for the interests of Nigerians, that it's not going to be another, I'm just a minister and I'm not doing anything. So a lot expected from them.
And final word from you, Professor?
Yeah, it's going to be a mixed bag. Quite a number of them will want to leave some legacies. Many of them will perform, no doubt. But some of them will not also perform. And those who are going to perform, we already identified them. We just hope that a lot more will join those that we have identified, you know, in terms of increasing or boosting the performance record of the ministry, of the ministers. You can count on Professor Tahir Mohammed, for instance. You can count on Professor Patti. You can count on the young man in Ministry of Communication, you know, and of course, Lateef Fagbemi, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Wale Edun, of course, we expect some performance, you know, given that all the necessary factors, you know, are in the right place. All the right pieces are in the right points in the jigsaw. You know, like economics says, ceteris paribus. Hopefully, we just hope there are a lot more of them who also want to leave a very good name, far beyond the expectations of the president that appointed them in the first instance.
And they should know Nigerians are watching them. I'd like to thank you, Professor Adeniyi, Dr. Ikokwu. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Well, that's it for this edition. Tonight, do join me again tomorrow. From me and the team here in Abuja is goodbye, and thank you for watching.